The topic that I'm speaking of tonight is how the mafia helped the Allies during World War II. On February 9th, 1942, a fire broke out on the Normandy, which is a luxury French liner that had been mothballed in New York by its owners to prevent it being destroyed by German submarines. America at war, the U.S. Navy took over the Normandy and renamed her the Lafayette, after the French hero who helped the Americans during the Revolution. Completion was set for February 28, 1942. Some 1,500 sailors and civilians were on board when the fire broke out. At least 128 were injured, but only one died. The official government report was that the fire was accidental, but many suspected that it was the work of the Nazis. The burning of the Normandy sent a chill through the corridors of Washington. The Port of New York handled nearly half of the U.S. foreign trade. 200 cargo docks, warehouses, and piers in Manhattan, Queens, New Jersey, and Brooklyn covered nearly 80 miles of coastal frontage. It had to be protected at all costs. In May 1942, less than 4 months after the burning of the Normandy, 2 German U-boats set out from France to America. On board were teams of highly trained saboteurs, Germans who had lived in America prior to the war. Their mission was to strike at crucial American industrial infrastructure. One of the U-boats arrived at its target on Long Island. The other arrived at its destination in Florida. Tours planned to rendezvous in Cincinnati at the beginning of July to begin their campaign of blowing up factories, bridges, railroads, etc., from the East Coast to the Midwest. One of the saboteurs, Georg Dasch, a German-American who served in the U.S. Army, had a change of heart and confessed that the whole plot to the FBI, putting an end to the plot. The release of this information served to remind the Americans of the ever-present threat by spies in their homeland. They made just this point in a public announcement stating, quote, "Other saboteurs may be coming to our shores. They must be stopped. We ask every American citizen to immediately report information regarding un-American activities to the FBI on the New York waterfront." Over the next 3 years, hundreds of Allied ships safely left the New York harbor. Had the FBI been totally successful, or was some other factor involved in this operation? The story of how the U.S. government struck a deal with the mobster Lucky Luciano and his criminal associates to defend America's East Coast against sabotage is recorded in the Hurlins Report of 1954. This report is named after William B. Hurlins, Commissioner of Investigation. The investigation was carried out under the direction of Thomas E. Dewey, who was Attorney General of New York and future presidential candidate. The U.S. Navy was not happy with the findings of this report, and the report remained secret for many decades. It is still not published. The report made the case for the U.S. government talking to criminals stating, quote, "The intelligence authorities were greatly concerned with the problems of sabotage and espionage. Suspicions were rife with respect to the leaking of information about convoy movements. Sabotage was suspected in the burning of the Normandy. Commercial fishing fleets were suspected as sources of fuel and supplies to the enemy submarines," unquote. Intelligence officer of the 3rd Naval District, which included New York and New Jersey. It was his idea for naval agents to talk to underworld contacts who might be able to help secure the docks. McFall got the backing of Admiral Carl F. Espay, who was Director of Naval Intelligence. Quote, "The outcome of the war was extremely grave," said Espay. In addition, there were In addition, there were the most serious concerns over possible sabotage of the ports. It was necessary to use every possible means to prevent and forestall sabotage and to prevent the possible supplying of and contact with enemy submarines. Did naval intelligence have any qualms about the morality of dealing with known criminals? Lieutenant Anthony Marslow, who was assigned to the 3rd Naval Intelligence Office, was clear on this. Quote, the exploitation of informants, irrespective of their backgrounds, is not only desirous, but necessary when the nation is struggling for its existence. By any and all means, I include the so-called underworld. Marslow claimed that this process began as early as December 1941, before the burning of the Normandy. Commander Charles R. Haffenden, Marslow's commanding officer, would be the dominant personality running the project in the intelligence office. Suggested the possibility that underworld leaders might be willing to cooperate in the war by helping to gather information useful to naval intelligence, and an ally of Lucky Luciano. At a meeting on a park bench at midnight, Gerfine told Lanza, quote, we suspect U-boats are being refueled and getting fresh supplies off of our coast. We think it's the fishing smacks that are the source of resupply. You know, the people involved in commercial fishing, you can find out how and where the submarines are being refueled. Gerfine asked Lanza if he would help naval intelligence. Lanza said, I'll help in the war effort. I got contacts in the fish market and fishing boats and barge captains and seamen all along the Atlantic coast. Gerfine made it clear that Lanza was volunteering his help and that no promise had been made by the DA's office in exchange for his cooperation. Lanza got union books for the agents who were working with Haffenden and introduced naval personnel to groups of fishermen and asked them to report any unusual sightings of human remains and reported this to naval intelligence. Lanza was clever enough to know that he had to keep his mafia overlords as well as naval intelligence informed of his activities. In early 1942, the war in the Atlantic was going badly for the Allies. In the 10 months, January to October 1942, 521 Allied ships had been lost to enemy action. Packs of Axis submarines were operating without hindrance in the northwest Atlantic, hunting prey close to the U.S. East Coast. The roll call of destruction would peak in May with 142 losses, and in June with 111 ships lost. It was a time for strong action and pressure on naval intelligence was great. Agents spread their inquiries beyond the immediate waterfront. They became aware of Lanza's limits as a fixer. Lanza was coming to the same conclusion. On April 16, 1942, Lanza told his attorney that he was having difficulty getting information from certain Italian-born figures in the New York underworld. He suspected he was not getting their cooperation because they knew he had an indictment pending against him. With all the questions he was asking, they figured that maybe he was working as an informant for the DA. Lanza then came up with a big idea. If he could get Lucky Luciano on board, he'd get the cooperation from various people he needed. The message was clear. Get Luciano on board and the whole East Coast will be protected for good. Luciano had been New York's public enemy #1 and was serving a 30 to 50-year jail sentence for running a prostitution ring. His conviction was Thomas Dewey's greatest triumph. Could the U.S. government really put this aside and strike an alliance with the chief of the American mafia? The answer was yes. The official procedure was started by moving Luciano from one prison to one closer to New York, officials who were going to visit him. John Lyons, the New York State Correction Commissioner, authorized the transfer. To avoid any publicity, Luciano was transferred along with a number of other inmates on May 12th, 1942. June 4th, Meyer Lansky, a Jewish hood and friend of Luciano's, and Moses Polikoff, Luciano's attorney, made their first visit to Luciano to discuss naval intelligence business. They explained to him the Navy's need for his help. Apparently, Luciano had no idea why he had been transferred. Luciano explained that by cooperating with the Navy, Luciano might get a reduction in his sentence. Luciano said that he'd be happy to help the government. Word was to go out that Luciano okayed the project to help naval intelligence secure the docks. The Hurlins report recorded that Lansky acted as a liaison between Luciano and other mafiosi. Lansky said, quote, "There will be no German submarines in the port of New York. Every man down there who works in the harbor, all sailors, all fishermen, every longshoreman, etc., is now helping the U.S. fight the Nazis." Reese Kelly, a naval intelligence agent, said that there was a decided and definite cooperative approach by all dock people after the Navy's contact with Luciano. The Hurlins report recorded at least 20 meetings between Luciano, Polikoff, and Lansky between May 1942 and August 1945, although many other meetings occurred. The decision to invade Sicily was made in Casablanca, Morocco, in January 1943. The U.S. Navy always believed that the main struggle of the war was in the Pacific, and its leaders were irritated by what they considered distracting issues in Europe. The lack of interest in the European theater, compounded by the lack of intelligence in the Mediterranean area, made things difficult. Not expected to be fighting in that area that was traditionally the sphere of influence of the Royal Navy. As a result, the decision at the Casablanca Conference, the U.S. Navy had to work hard and fast to gather information necessary for a successful invasion. Despite various excuses, U.S. naval intelligence set about the task of preparing for the invasion of Sicily, which was named Operation Husky, with speed and imagination. District, the same men who had been helping Heffenden and McFall secure the New York docks. The fact that both operations involved making contact with Italian speakers from criminal organizations was no coincidence. Commander Heffenden became directly involved in the invasion of Sicily on May 24, 1943, when he was appointed officer in charge of F section of the 3rd District Intelligence Office. Report, quote, "Numerous Italians of Sicilian birth or background and their relatives were enlisted to provide Commander Heffenden and his assistants with information about the terrains, harbors, etc. of Sicily in anticipation of an Allied invasion there." To these contacts and informants, the names of friendly Sicilian natives and even the Sicilian mafia personalities who could be trusted were obtained and actually used in the Sicilian campaign, unquote. Commander Heffenden later told the Kefauver Senate Committee inquiry into organized crime that this was a substantial process involving 146 investigators gathering information from thousands of sources. Captain McFall was kept fully informed of the entire research procedure and commended Haffenden for his handling of it. McFall said, quote, Haffenden would report frequently and that many of his informants came to naval intelligence through the instigation of Luciano, unquote. So far I've discussed the American relationship between the mafia and Allied intelligence, but the British were also involved. The North African branch of the British Secret Service, SIS, also known as M16, prepared the Handbook on Politics and Intelligence Services for Sicily. It was based on a variety of sources, including interrogation of Axis prisoners of war. Among the list of Sicilians mentioned is Vito Lamantia, who is described as, quote, head of a mafia group known to be very anti-fascist. Now, the mafia was, in general, was very anti-fascist in Sicily because Mussolini had tried to wipe out the mafia in the late 1920s and so forth. So the mafia was very anti-Mussolini. Publicity were also discussed. From this, it seems that the British also had no problem making contact with leading mafiosi in Sicily in order to help their invasion. On April 9th, 1943, the Joint Staff Planners for the U.S. Joint Chief of Staff prepared a report entitled Special Military Plan for Psychological Warfare in Sicily. It was about preparing dissident elements in Sicily for active resistance of the Germans. The plan strongly recommended the arming of Sicilian mafiosi and encouraging them to carry out sabotage on bridges, railroads, military installations, and so forth. In Washington on April 15th, 1943. It was passed on to the commanding general, North African Theater, who was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The message was clear. The mafia was to be deployed in the conquest of Sicily. Unbeknownst to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Sicilians, especially the mafia, were already engaged in a secret war against the German occupiers. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, swung into action on the night of 9-10 July 1943. A vast armada of 2,500 ships and landing craft headed from Africa to Sicily. On board were 181,000 men belonging to two armies. One was Lieutenant General George S. Patton's U.S. 7th Army. The other was General Bernard Montgomery's British and Canadian 8th Army. The Americans landed in the on the southwest coast of the island, while Montgomery's army landed on the southeast coast. Now, if you take a look at the map that I have, I've got two maps, were the New York Naval Intelligence Team of Lieutenant Anthony Marslow, Paul Alfieri, Joachim Titolo, and Ensign James Murray. They were broken into two teams. Alfieri and Titolo were assigned to Licata, which you'll see on the map number 2 there, the second map. And Murray and Marslow were assigned to Jala, which is also on that second map. This is where the U.S., basically where the U.S. troops landed. They were armed with information they had gathered from Luciano and his mobsters. Marslow later recalled that the information was, quote, of tremendous help following the landing, including the manner in which the ports were operated, the chains of command, etc., which enabled us to carry out our mission. Alfieri said, quote, I made beneficial contacts with numerous persons who had been deported. They were extremely cooperative and helpful because they spoke the dialect of the region and some English. One of Alfieri's first contacts was a man Lucky Luciano had saved from the electric chair by smuggling him out of New York to Sicily. The guy had killed a cop, and Luciano was standing up for him. Alfieri told his contact that he wanted to get to the headquarters of the Italian Naval Command. He was told that it was in a villa set back from the beach. The local mafioso gathered his gunmen and they attacked the headquarters, killing the German guards.